My stepmom, Vanessa, grew up fairly well off as a teenager in the late 1960s. Her family had moved to the US from Ireland when she was about 10. She attended a nice high school in an affluent town, where she became close friends with a girl named Sarah. Sarah didn't exactly fit in with Vanessa's usual crowd. She was more adventurous, outdoorsy, and loved things like hiking, fishing, and sailing. Vanessa, on the other hand, had a permanent scowl and always looked a little miserable. But Sarah's influence got her to try new things. So, on one Sunday, the two decided to go hiking in some hills about an hour away. Vanessa laced up what were probably her very pricey hiking boots, and they took off in Sarah's car, arriving at a makeshift parking area marked by wooden posts. There wasn't another car in sight, something that only seemed important in hindsight. Rather than following the marked trails, Sarah, ever the daredevil, decided they should go off-path. Vanessa, never one to enjoy discomfort, whined about the heat and the bugs, but trudged along anyway. When they reached the top, Vanessa was over it, and after some complaints, Sarah finally agreed they'd start heading back down. About 10 minutes into their descent, Vanessa began complaining again. So Sarah relented and suggested they walk along the side of the road instead of the rough trail. They probably looked ridiculous, decked out in hiking gear but just strolling down an old back road. Not even 5 minutes later, an old, battered truck pulled up beside them. It was rusty, worn, and looked like it had seen better days. The driver, a man with a scruffy beard, a faded baseball cap, and long unkempt brown hair, rolled down the window and greeted them. He smiled through his beard, asking if they needed a ride. Vanessa later admitted she thought he was somewhat charming, even attractive. But Sarah immediately felt uneasy. Every instinct told her to say no, but Vanessa convinced her otherwise, saying it was just a quick drive back to the car. Reluctantly, Sarah agreed. They opened the passenger door, but instead of getting into the front, the man gestured for them to climb into the back seat. As soon as they sat down and the truck started moving, Sarah's stomach dropped. She realized they'd made a mistake. The back seat was fairly clean, but there was a length of rope on the floor behind the driver's seat. Beneath the passenger seat, she noticed several rolls of plastic wrap, partially hanging out of a box. It sent a shiver up her spine, but she didn't want to panic Vanessa, so she stayed quiet. After 10 minutes, the woods still looked just as dense, and they hadn't passed another car. Sarah asked how much longer it would take. The man responded casually that he was taking a different route and had to make a quick stop first. That was when Sarah's fear solidified into certainty. Something was seriously wrong. Sarah studied him carefully. He had dirt caked onto his collar, and his tangled hair made him look like he lived in the woods. He was young, strong-looking, and just a little bigger than them, but his silence as they drove made the air thick with tension. Neither girl asked more questions, and he didn't offer any more information. Minutes later, they pulled into a clearing where an old, small log cabin sat. A large stump stood out front, an axe buried in a split log beside it. Sarah's pulse pounded. The man turned off the truck, opened his door, and said, "I'll be right back. Stay put." Then he disappeared inside the cabin. Sarah turned to Vanessa, whispering furiously that they needed to get out of there. Vanessa, ever concerned with politeness and appearances, dismissed her worries. But Sarah was panicking now, practically begging her to listen. Finally, she put her foot down, forcing Vanessa to get out of the truck with her. They walked to the front of the vehicle, staring at the cabin. Why had he left them alone? It didn't make sense. Maybe he really was just stopping briefly, and running off would be incredibly rude. That's what Vanessa thought, at least, and she started heading back to the truck to wait. Sarah, frustrated, followed her. But when she got to the driver's side, something caught her eye. Peeking out from under the seat was a hatchet. Its blade was stained with dried red and brown marks, stuck to the floor. Sarah's heart nearly stopped. She lost it, pulling Vanessa away, who was now just as panicked. Without another word, they bolted, running off the side of the property and into the woods. Branches scraped them as they crashed through the underbrush, Vanessa sobbing the whole time. Sarah, terrified he would hear them, tried to keep her quiet. After stumbling through the forest for what felt like forever, they finally saw a familiar wooden fence, the one surrounding the parking area where they'd left Sarah's car. Relief washed over them, but as they got closer, they froze. The truck was parked across the lot, facing the opposite direction. They couldn't see if anyone was inside. Vanessa, panicked beyond reason, wanted to sprint straight to the car, but Sarah held her back, insisting they wait. This was the late 60s, no cell phones, no nearby ranger stations, and nobody around. The lot was open, exposed. If they ran and he was watching, it could be disastrous. So, they crouched behind a tree, hidden among the bushes, and waited. Hours passed. The sun dipped low, the sky darkened, and the sounds of the forest grew louder. Vanessa was antsy, but Sarah refused to move. Just as she was giving in and preparing to make a break for it, they heard a soft clunk. Across the dimly lit lot, one of the back doors to their car swung open. The bearded man slid out from the back seat. He stood there for a moment, scanning the woods, then shut the door and walked back to his truck. Without hurry, he climbed in, started the engine, and drove off. The second he disappeared, the girls ran. They jumped into the car, slammed the doors shut, and sped out of there before they could even catch their breath. If that man is still out there, he'd be an old man by now. But they both hope they never cross paths with him again. It happened in late October. The cabin had seen better days. The closest town was a long, empty stretch away, a winding road that seemed to swallow every trace of civilization. Nobody came out here unless they had a reason, and most reasons weren't good ones. From the moment I moved in, something felt off. The solar battery barely held a charge, leaving my nights swallowed in darkness, except for the faint glow of my headlamp and the occasional silver flash of moonlight. The nights stretched on, endless and stifling. At first, it was the bats that kept me awake. Dozens of them rustling in the rafters, their tiny claws scratching and their high-pitched calls echoing in the silence. Then it was something else, something heavier, footsteps on the porch. The first time I heard them, I convinced myself it was an animal, maybe a raccoon or a stray dog, but deep down I knew better. Raccoons don't walk in slow, measured steps. They don't stop like they're listening, waiting. After 2 months, the scratching started. First along the edges of the porch, then closer, then on the door. Something was testing the cabin. Every time I stepped outside, the air felt thick, the towering trees pressing in as if they were hiding something just out of sight. I started keeping my shotgun within reach, even though I technically wasn't supposed to have one. But tell me, who the hell lives out here alone and doesn't carry protection? Tuesday nights were grocery nights, the only time I left after dark. The drive back was always tense, headlights barely piercing the thick blackness of the woods. But this night was different. Before I even pulled in, I felt it. Something was waiting. I stepped out, keys clutched in my hand, and that's when I saw them. 2 eyes, hovering just above my front door. Too high for a coyote, too low for a deer, about 4 feet up, and they weren't moving. My breath caught in my throat, and every instinct screamed at me to run. I shouted into the dark, telling it to get the hell out. The eyes stayed locked on me. Then, slowly, they lowered and crept forward. Heart hammering, I grabbed a piece of firewood from the sack and hurled it. The log hit the ground with a heavy thud. The thing flinched but made no sound. My hands trembled as I fumbled with my keys, nearly dropping them. The solar battery had cut out again, leaving me blind, and I could hear it breathing slow, steady, too controlled for an animal, too aware. I forced my way inside and grabbed my shotgun. When I stepped back out, it was still there, but closer, just at the edge of my failing headlamp's glow. Pulse roaring in my ears, I loaded the gun, never looking away. One-handed, I threw another log. This time, it moved, slowly, then melted back into the trees. No sound, no rush of movement, just gone. That night, I downed 4 beers and slept with the shotgun in my arms. Morning came, and I almost convinced myself it had been a dream, until the trail crew arrived. they found mountain lion tracks everywhere, across the porch, by the rocking chair, even circling the cabin. But after that night, I kept hearing it. The creak of the rocking chair in the dead of night. Footsteps on the porch. I'd grab my shotgun, throw open the door, nothing. No movement, no sound. And when I checked the ground, there were no more tracks. It had been raining for weeks. There should have been prints. I've been watched by mountain lions before. They stay to the shadows. They don't taunt you. They don't play games. But something out there was. And whatever it was playing with me. When I was around 7 years old, my father decided we should take a short trip to a rented cabin for the weekend. He thought it would be a great way for our family to spend time together without the usual distractions. My mother agreed, saying it would be a perfect chance to bond. So, early on a Friday morning, we packed up our car and set off, eager for the adventure ahead. The drive was long and winding, cutting through frost-covered hills and forests. When we arrived, the chill hit me right away. The air was crisp, almost biting, and the ground was already dusted with a thin layer of snow. It made sense. It was late November, and winter was creeping in. We unloaded our things, settled into the cozy wooden cabin, and picked where we would sleep. That evening, after a warm meal by the fireplace, we all went to bed, excited about exploring the woods the next day. That night, however, something odd happened. I was lying in bed when I heard a noise outside, what sounded like footsteps crunching against the frozen ground. Curious, I peeked out the window but saw only the dark outlines of trees swaying in the breeze. I convinced myself it must have been an animal and tried to sleep, but the sound returned about 15 minutes later. This time, I nudged my older sister, who was 11. Together, we crept to the window and, for a brief second, saw a shadowy figure standing at the edge of the trees. It was too dark to make out any details, just a tall, bulky shape. A chill ran down my spine. My sister and I quickly ducked below the window, whispering about what we had just seen. In the end, we decided it was better to ignore it and try to sleep. Still, I lay awake for hours, my mind racing with uneasy thoughts. The next morning, I woke up to the delicious smell of breakfast cooking and my mother humming in the kitchen. I asked if I could go outside to help my father, who was already outside chopping wood. My sister, still groggy from our restless night, chose to stay inside. As I stepped outside, I noticed my dad talking to a stranger. The man was short and sturdy, wearing a worn-out cap and a heavy jacket. His face was flushed, and despite the cold air, beads of sweat glistened on his forehead. As I approached, my dad introduced me. "This is my son," he said, calling me by name. The man gave me a tight-lipped smile. "Nice to meet you, kid. I'm Greg." His eyes lingered on me a little too long, and without thinking, I blurted, "You look nervous. Are you okay?" Greg let out a forced chuckle and rubbed the back of his neck. Yeah, just old memories." My father nodded sympathetically, and I didn't question it further, though something about him put me on edge. Greg said he was staying in a nearby cabin with his family and had come over to introduce himself. My dad, always friendly, invited him inside for breakfast. At the table, Greg asked me questions about my favorite games and hobbies. He seemed nice enough, but something still felt off. After breakfast, I went outside to play while my dad continued chopping wood. At one point, I tripped, scraping my knee on a sharp rock. Tears welled in my eyes as I examined the cut. Almost instantly, Greg appeared beside me. "Come to my cabin," he said. "I've got bandages." At that moment, my dad was inside helping my mom, and I was too young to think twice. Without hesitation, I followed Greg into the woods. We walked much farther than I expected. The icy air stung my cheeks, and my knee ached with each step. "How much further?" I asked. "Just a little more," he kept saying. After what felt like 20 minutes, we reached a small, run-down cabin. It didn't look like the well-kept rentals I had seen earlier. "Where's your family?" I asked as we stepped inside. The air smelled musty, and scattered clothes littered the floor. Greg avoided my question for a while before finally muttering, "They're out for a walk. Come on, let's fix that knee." He knelt beside me, pressing a bandage onto my cut, but his hand lingered a little too long. He rubbed my legs slowly. "Strong legs," he said with an unsettling smile. "That's good." My stomach twisted. I abruptly stood up, mumbling that I should get back. Greg's smile faded. "No need to rush," he said, stepping in front of the door. "Stay. Have some lunch." My heart pounded. My eyes darted around the room, searching for another way out. "My parents will be looking for me," I said. Greg waved a dismissive hand. "I already told them you were with me." He was lying. Just then, a door in the back of the cabin creaked open, and a pale woman with sunken eyes stepped out. She locked eyes with me and whispered, "Help me." Greg spun around. "Get back inside," he barked. The woman flinched and disappeared into the room. Greg slammed the door shut and turned back to me with an eerie smile. "Don't mind her. She's sick. Now, let's try on some different clothes." Panic surged through me. I lunged for the door, yanked it open, and sprinted into the woods. "Hey!" Greg shouted behind me, his footsteps crunching through the snow as he gave chase. My heart pounded as I dodged branches and leaped over fallen logs, desperate to get away. His heavy footsteps grew louder. He was gaining on me. After what felt like forever, I finally spotted a familiar clearing, the cabin. My father stood outside, his eyes widening in alarm as I ran toward him. "Greg," I gasped. "He's not a good guy. He tried to keep me there." My dad didn't waste time asking questions. He rushed inside, called the local police, and grabbed his axe. The officers arrived soon after, but when they searched Greg's cabin, it was empty. Inside, they found ropes, duct tape, and children's clothes that didn't belong to me. The woman was gone. Greg was gone. The police later told us that the cabin hadn't been rented to anyone in months. We left that same day. My dad kept checking the rearview mirror the entire drive home. The authorities never updated us on their search. We never found out who Greg really was, what happened to the woman, or how he had ended up there. But I still have nightmares about that weekend. It had started as just another trip to the woods. This was something that happened when my best friend and I were in high school. It was around 2008 in a small town in northern Pennsylvania. We first met in the 3rd grade and have been friends ever since. Now we're about 29 years old. Let me give you some background before getting into the story. My friend C and I became inseparable from the moment we met. We spent so much time at each other's houses that her mom ended up setting up a guest room just for me. I had everything there, clothes, toys, even pictures. I was part of the family. C's mother, Donna, always wanted 2 daughters, so she considered me her second child. Now, on to the actual event. This happened when we were in our 2nd year of high school. Donna had been divorced for a while and had dated a few men, often meeting them through dating websites like Match.com. She had been chatting with a guy online for a few weeks and was really excited about him. She always showed us the profiles of men she was considering going out with, saying she needed her daughter's stamp of approval first. One evening, she called us into her room and showed us the man she had been talking to. His profile was simple, as you'd expect for a middle-aged man in 2008. His headline read, "Seeking a Strong Mother." I made a joke about his odd wording and how strange it was to introduce himself like that, but we moved on. The profile described his background working with metal, his passion for forging steel, and how his job kept his cold heart warm. Something about it felt off to me, but he was attractive, short black hair, a well-groomed beard, strong jawline, piercing blue eyes, and in good shape for a man in his 40s. I mentioned the weird vibe I got, and C joked about how her mom always ended up with the socially awkward ones. We all laughed, knowing she had met some interesting characters online before. Despite my reservations, we told her to go for it, and they arranged a dinner date. He lived about 2 hours away and was driving to our town to meet up with her. The plan was for him to park at the house, and they'd take one car into town. C and I helped Donna pick out an outfit and did her hair and makeup before heading upstairs to give her space to get ready. We were upstairs painting C's bedroom walls, music playing, laughing, when suddenly, without a single knock or doorbell ring, he just walked into the house. No announcement, no sound, and even the dogs didn't bark. We jumped, startled, and spun around, only to find a man standing right behind us. We had no idea how long he had been there or how long he had been watching us. Well, didn't know I was getting 2 for 1, he muttered in a raspy, low voice, chuckling as he casually walked into the room like he belonged there. The scent of cigarettes filled the air, and for a brief moment, it felt like we were in some eerie episode of The Twilight Zone. Then I really looked at him. He resembled the man in the profile picture, but his hair was speckled with gray instead of pure black, and his eyes weren't ice blue. They were entirely black, like there were no irises at all. "Are you?" I started to ask, but at that moment, Donna's voice called from downstairs, "Who got hurt?" She must have thought we were messing around and someone had fallen. Her voice startled him, and he turned just as she reached the top of the stairs. He stretched out his arms and, in a much friendlier tone than before, said, "Donna, you look stunning." I knocked, but no one answered, so I let myself in. "Hope that's okay. These must be your girls? They're just as lovely as their mom." Something about the way he said "mom" made my skin crawl. C and I glanced at each other, both silently communicating that we were freaked out. Donna forced a smile and said, "Next time, just ring the bell, and I'll let you in." He nodded, then hugged her like they were old friends. Over her shoulder, she rolled her eyes at us, clearly unimpressed by his excuse. As she led him downstairs, we could hear him apologizing repeatedly. The moment they were out of sight, we grabbed our phones and texted Donna everything he had said to us. About 10 minutes later, she came back upstairs, shut the door, and asked if we were okay. She hugged us and apologized, explaining that he said we reminded him of his daughters and didn't mean to scare us. Then, she said they were heading out for dinner. We hugged her, wished her a good time, and watched her leave. As soon as the door shut, C and I started talking over each other, both saying the same things. "Did you see his eyes? What the hell was that?" C whispered. "He looks like the guy from the pictures, but not exactly." We agreed to text Donna again, urging her to be careful. She reassured us that everything was fine and promised to check in every hour. For the next 5 hours, she kept her word, but then her last message said, "I'm officially creeped out. Coming home now." That was an hour ago. We paced around anxiously, waiting, and when we finally saw headlights in the driveway, we ran to the window. Donna barely waited for the car to stop before she jumped out. She gave a quick wave to the driver before rushing to the front door. She locked both deadbolts and the chain before turning to us. "Lights off. Upstairs now." Once inside C's room, we looked outside to see the man's truck still sitting in the driveway, engine running. Donna took a deep breath and told us what happened. Long story short, he had suggested a picnic after claiming to have made reservations at the wrong restaurant. When she declined, he guilted her by saying she owed him for driving 2 hours. She gave in, but instead of a picnic, he took her to a secluded cabin. Once inside, his personality changed. He made unsettling comments about how easy it was to get her alone and how he liked strong moms because they had so much fight. She started to feel sick, whether from fear or intuition, and asked to go home. He resisted but eventually agreed. On the drive, he asked her disturbing questions about us, what we did to get in trouble, what punishments we got, and if she would sacrifice herself for us. Then he pulled out his phone and showed her pictures of us. She realized he had gone through her social media and saved photos of us. That was when she knew she had to get away. When they pulled up to our house, she didn't waste a second. She bolted inside and immediately called the sheriff. The moment we saw him step out of his truck with a duffel bag, the sheriff's cruiser appeared behind him. He panicked, threw the bag back into the truck, and tried to drive off, only to find himself blocked. When he realized he had no escape, he tore across the yard, disappearing into the night. We never found out what happened to him. For months after, we received eerie Facebook messages. Some we knew were from him. Then one day they just stopped. Even now, we hope to never see that man again. All of these events took place over the course of 3 years, beginning in 2011. When I moved into an old cottage, a childhood friend of mine asked if I'd be her roommate. Since I needed to move out of my parents' house and she needed help covering rent, it seemed like a good arrangement. The cottage dated back to the 1700s, though we weren't completely sure of its exact age. The road it stood on still bore the name of the original owners, a tobacco farming family that once controlled a large portion of what is now one of the biggest cities in the country. If you search for images of early American colonial cottages, you'll find places that look similar to it. At first, we thought the building may have been slave quarters, but after doing some research, we realized it was more likely a stable house. That theory made sense, especially after our dog dug up an old horseshoe one day. I still have it. The night we moved in, I immediately felt an eerie presence. The house had all sorts of strange quirks. There weren't any doors leading upstairs to my bedroom or downstairs to my roommate's room. Her room was part of an addition built in the 1980s. The previous owners also added a much-needed kitchen and bathroom, as the original structure had neither. Now that you have a sense of the house, let me tell you why I'm sharing this. Right after moving in, I constantly felt like I was being watched. The house always seemed cold, dark, and damp, like a basement. Sure, that was to be expected in such an old house, but this felt different. It started with scratching. Every night, I would wake up to the sound of scratching right under my bed, near my head. At first, I thought it was mice, but after listening closely, I realized the noise was too deliberate. It sounded like a long drag followed by a pause, then another drag. I just pulled the blanket over my head, covered my ears, and squeezed my eyes shut. I was a 22-year-old man at the time, but I felt like a child hiding from monsters. I wasn't about to confront whatever was making those noises. One night, I was still awake when the scratching started. It came from the far corner of my room, above my bed. Then it moved down the wall under my bed and across the floor. After a while, it crept back up the wall and disappeared. Here's why I knew it wasn't mice. My walls were solid wood. The same thick logs that made up the outside of the house also made up the inside. There was no space in between, and the floor was just as solid. This place was built to last. I started getting really uneasy, so I moved downstairs to sleep. My roommate asked why, and when I told her, she admitted she had been hearing the same thing when she was home alone. This was all within the first week of moving in. Now, here's where it gets even weirder. When we moved in, I had to remove all the screws sealing the windows shut and even had to unscrew one of the exterior doors that had been bolted closed. We also had to clean out what we thought was some sort of animal food from the oven. And then there were the hundreds of mail order catalogs stacked around the house, all addressed to the previous tenant. We joked that the guy must have been a shut-in cultist, but looking back, we weren't entirely joking. Eventually, we started sleeping in the living room, thinking that being together would make us feel safer. The air felt lighter when we were in the same room. That was until one night when I had a dream that something dark was approaching me. In my dream, I was watching myself sleep as if I were outside of my own body. The entity loomed over me, and suddenly, I felt an overwhelming pressure in my head, followed by a sharp ringing in my ears. The intensity built up until I suddenly woke up, and at that exact moment, the TV shut off by itself. We had been having problems with the TV turning on and off randomly, but this time it was different. It felt too precise, too intentional. I knew for a fact that I had turned the TV off before going to bed, so why was it on in the first place? After that night, we moved into her room. She said nothing ever happened in there, maybe because it was part of the newer addition. I'm not sure. Either way, whatever was in that house seemed to have an odd sense of humor because, funnily enough, we ended up falling for each other. We've been married for 5 years now and are trying for a baby. One day, while reading in my room upstairs, I was dozing off when my window suddenly started opening and shutting on its own. By that point, I was tired of dealing with this thing. The next day, I set up the same situation, And sure enough, it happened again. It was like whatever was there wanted my attention. Strangely, it never happened when I wasn't in the room. Fed up, I finally yelled at whatever was in the house, telling it to leave us alone. That seemed to work, for a while. But then, when I was home alone, alarm clocks would go off the moment my wife left for work. Drawers would slide open by themselves, and there would be loud banging at the front door. Over time, though, the strange activity faded. Maybe as I matured, the spirit stopped bothering me as much. Nowadays, my in-laws live there. They were our landlords, and the house feels warm, cozy, and inviting now. I can spend time there alone without feeling that looming presence anymore. The house is still in the family. My mother-in-law refuses to part with it. I went from being a clueless 20-something to fixing gutters and scheduling maintenance for the house I once feared. I've grown attached to the place and everything it brought me. When my father-in-law passed away, I spent some time there alone, hoping for a familiar knock, but nothing happened. Now, when I visit, there's no fear, no tension, just warmth and a sense of peace. I don't think whatever was there was trying to haunt us forever. Maybe it was more like a protective force, a spiritual guardian of sorts. Once my wife and I settled down and matured, it finally let us be. Strangely, it always seemed to mess with me more than it did her. Maybe I had some kind of open connection to the paranormal that made it easier for spirits to slip through. We both experienced strange things, but I've always been more sensitive to the supernatural than she has. My mother swears she's seen ghosts before, and I think my side of the family has some kind of sensitivity to these things. We never really talked about it much, but over the years, little stories have come out. Mostly good ones. I guess I just come from a family of people who can sense the unseen. I lived on the edge of a vast nature reserve in an old, rundown shack. Calling it remote wouldn't even cover it. The only way in was a winding 5-mile dirt path, barely wide enough for a single car. Thick trees crowded both sides, their tangled branches arching overhead, making it feel like I was driving through a tunnel. There were no streetlights, no neighbors, and no cell service. Just me, the trees, and whatever else roamed the wild. The shack itself was as basic as it got, no power, and worst of all, no way to lock the door. The owner insisted on keeping it as untouched as possible, refusing any modern updates to their precious off-grid retreat. At first, I didn't mind. I grew up in a rural area. I was used to roughing it. My roommate, though, was a city guy doing an internship with the Park Service. He thought the unlocked door was hilarious. What's the worst that could happen? A raccoon breaking in? He joked. I didn't laugh. Started small, just noises at night. At first, I brushed it off as local wildlife. We were deep in the forest, after all. But these sounds weren't the random rustling of leaves or the occasional scurry of small animals. No, these were slow, heavy footsteps, deliberate, unhurried, crunching through the undergrowth. At first, I tried to convince myself it was a deer, a coyote, something normal. But as the nights passed, I couldn't ignore the pattern. The footsteps always started far off, moving at a steady pace through the trees. They never ran, never darted, just walked. Then they'd stop, always in the thickest part of the brush, where the shadows swallowed everything. I'd hold my breath, straining to listen. Sometimes silence would stretch for what felt like forever. Other times, I swore I could hear breathing, deep, slow, human. Not the quick sniffs of a deer or the huff of a wild hog. Something else. Then, nothing. Minutes would pass, maybe an hour. Just when I'd start to think I imagined it, the footsteps would start again, this time closer. A deep unease settled in my chest. It wasn't just the sounds. It was the feeling they brought. The prickle on the back of my neck, the ancient instinct that tells you you're being watched. It followed me everywhere. Even in daylight, the forest felt suffocating. The trees seemed taller, their shadows darker. Every time I stepped outside, I felt exposed. And then there was the cabin door. It didn't lock. That thought consumed me at night. As the noises continued, my mind raced with questions. What if it wasn't an animal? What if it wasn't just in my head? What if, one night, whatever was out there decided to step inside? I started sleeping in my car. Felt safer even if it was just an illusion. I parked nearly a mile away from the cabin, thinking distance might help. Didn't. The footsteps still came. The breaking point came on a night I'll never forget. Past midnight, I was in the driver's seat, reclined, wrapped in a blanket. Then I heard it, those same slow steps in the leaves. But this time, they didn't stop at the trees. They kept coming. I sat up, heart pounding. The night was pitch black, the forest an endless void beyond my windshield. I couldn't see anything, but I could hear it. A twig snapped. And then, just outside my window, a ragged, wheezing breath. My hands shook as I fumbled for the keys. I nearly dropped them. When I turned the ignition, the headlights flared on, illuminating nothing. But I didn't wait. I threw the car in reverse and got the hell out of there. By morning, I packed up and left for good. My roommate, still convinced I was paranoid, stayed behind. He lasted less than a month. He got robbed twice. After the second time, he finally set up motion-activated cameras. What they captured made my stomach drop. A man, tall and thin, with a filthy coat and long, unkempt hair, had been out there, hiding, watching me. When I was 8 years old, my dad, William, took my older brother, James, and me to a secluded cabin deep in the Scottish countryside for a week-long vacation. We also brought our tabby cat, Oliver. The cabin was small but cozy, surrounded by dense forest and far from the closest village. The bedrooms were on the upper floor, and mine was the farthest from the others, positioned right where the trees began. A single window sat beside my bed, giving me an unsettling view of an old, twisted maple tree that I had failed to climb the day before. There were no curtains or blinds to block the outside world. One night, I felt homesick and couldn't sleep. Oliver lay curled beside me while I read a comic book using a flashlight. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, I heard a soft tapping on the window. At first, I thought it was just a branch moving in the breeze, but then the tapping changed. It became rhythmic, like someone knocking with their knuckles. Then I heard a whisper, "Let me in, boy." "It's me, Dad." A voice called from beyond the glass. My body went stiff. A cold dread crept over me. I knew it wasn't my father. I wanted to scream, but fear held me frozen. "Come on, Leo, it's cold out here. Just open up." "I only want a hug," the voice urged. I turned toward the window, clutching Oliver. His fur bristled under my fingers, and he let out a low hiss. I buried my face in his fur, praying the stranger would go away. Then I heard a sound that still chills me to this day, a sharp, grating noise. Slowly, I peeked up. The man outside was grinning, his mouth stretched far too wide, his eyes glinting with something cruel. He dragged a small blade across the glass, producing that awful screeching sound. At last, I found my voice and screamed. The man's grin twisted into a look of fury and shock. His eyes flicked toward my bedroom door just as my father burst in, holding his old hunting rifle. My brother was right behind him, gripping a wooden bat. The man outside suddenly looked terrified. He stumbled back, his footsteps thudding against the ground as he dropped out of sight. My father rushed to the window just in time to see the shadowy figure vanish into the woods. None of us slept that night. My father kept watch at the window, a knife in his hand, while my brother sat beside me on the bed. The police arrived in the morning, noting the scratches on the glass and the footprints in the frost-covered grass below. They promised to patrol the area, but we packed up and left the cabin that same day, never to return. The man was never caught. To this day, I can still hear his voice, soft, coaxing, like a snake trying to lure its prey. And sometimes, in the dead of winter, I swear I can still hear those footsteps crunching in the snow. Oliver, now 15 and as feisty as ever, remains my little hero. He never stopped hissing until that stranger disappeared, and I've never stopped double-checking that my windows are locked at night. I've always had a deep love for the forest. There's something almost magical about how it can make you feel completely opposite emotions at the same time. The endless rows of trees that seem identical at first glance but are, in truth, entirely unique. The thick canopy above that shields you from the light, wrapping you in an eerie, secret world. When I was a kid, the woods were where we lived. We spent every waking moment out there, as long as we made it home in time for supper. The rest of the day was ours, and looking back, those were some of the most unforgettable moments of my life. But there's one memory that still lingers in my mind, as vivid as if it happened just yesterday. The forest near our neighborhood was so familiar to us that we felt like we'd explored every inch of it. We must have roamed miles of land without ever really knowing how far the woods stretched. That wasn't something we thought about back then. We just set off together and followed wherever the day led us. We had our usual landmarks. The old oak stump meant we were 5 minutes from home. The small clearing told us we were 10 minutes away, and the abandoned shed marked the 20-minute point. None of us ever wrote this down, we just learned it over time. But on this particular day, we wandered deeper than ever before. There was no plan to go farther than usual, it just happened naturally. We passed every familiar marker, joking and messing around, moving both leisurely and quickly at the same time. The trees blurred past us, nothing felt different, until it did. We stumbled into a clearing, and in an instant, every single one of us froze. Laughter, conversation, even breathing seemed to stop all at once. Something about this place was wrong. For one thing, none of us recognized it. The dense wall of trees just abruptly ended, revealing a perfectly square space. But the thing that held our attention was the cabin standing in the middle of the clearing. Something none of us had ever seen before. It was just a simple wooden cabin, like countless others we had come across. But this one looked like it had been almost completely burned. The walls were blackened, and parts of the roof had caved in. Maybe my memory is exaggerating, but I swear I could still smell the smoke in the air and see the ashes settling around it. We moved closer, silent now, stepping cautiously toward the wreckage. The front door, or what was left of it, hung loosely on its hinges, tilting sideways. We approached as a group. No one was willing to go alone, but no one wanted to stay behind either. The wooden steps groaned beneath our weight as we stepped onto the porch. Every instinct screamed at me to turn and run, but I didn't. None of us did. I lifted my foot and kicked the door, collapsed inward like damp paper. "Hello!" My voice sounded steadier than I felt. No answer, just the heavy, suffocating scent of burnt wood. Inside, everything was covered in soot. Bookshelves, a fireplace, even a rocking chair with half its back missing. Then we heard it, a thump. We all turned, scanning the room, but there was nothing. Another thump. This time we looked at each other. No one was laughing anymore. Then a third one, and we saw it. A trapdoor in the floor, a perfect square carved into the wooden planks, held shut by a rusted padlock on one side and worn-out hinges on the other. And it was moving. The whole thing lifted slightly, a small puff of ash rising into the air. The padlock stretched against the force beneath it. Another hit, harder. We stood there, paralyzed, eyes glued to the trapdoor. It wasn't just shifting anymore, it was bending. Something was underneath. Something was trying to get out. And then, for the briefest moment, I saw it. A single, frenzied eye staring up through the crack. I don't remember making the decision to run, but suddenly, I was sprinting. My friends were ahead and behind me, our footsteps pounding against the ground. But I felt something else. Something was chasing us. I had never been the fastest among my friends, but in that moment, fear propelled me forward. I passed every single one of them, the thought of whatever had been beneath that door urging me to move faster than I ever had in my life. When we finally reached the old oak stump, we stopped. Every one of us bent over, hands on our knees, struggling to catch our breath. No one spoke. No one dared to be the first to admit how terrified we were. We all just looked at each other, silently acknowledging that whatever had happened back there was beyond our understanding. That evening, we walked home in silence. No jokes, no laughter, no mention of what we had seen. The next day, we went back to playing in the woods, just like always. But from then on, we never went that deep again. And no one ever questioned why. Even now, as an adult, I still can't explain it. But sometimes I think about that day. I think about what was trapped beneath that floor, how close it had been to getting out. And that thought still makes my skin crawl. My fiancé and I had just moved into a small cabin at the foot of a mountain, surrounded by thick forest. It was our first night there. No furniture yet, just an air mattress on the wooden floor. The closest neighbors were far down the road, too distant to hear or see from our place. It felt isolated. I was setting up the air mattress while my fiancé was in the shower when the air suddenly shifted. A heavy charge filled the room, like the moment before a lightning strike. My skin tingled, and the hairs on my arms stood up. Before I could react, the air mattress collapsed inward, the edges pressing to the floor while the middle lifted unnaturally, forming a strange arch. I stood frozen, my mind struggling to comprehend what I was witnessing. Then I felt something. I turned to my right. In the doorway, hovering at eye level, was a glowing orb about the size of a volleyball. It wasn't just a steady light. It shifted and swirled, almost like watching cells split under a microscope. The air felt thick, pressing down on me, and the entire cabin was eerily silent. I don't know how long I stared, seconds, minutes, but suddenly the orb shot straight at me. I dove aside, hitting the air mattress as the orb passed just inches from my head. Without slowing down, it blasted straight through the closed window and vanished into the woods. I lay there, my heart pounding, staring at the glass. It was perfectly intact. No hole, no crack, as if nothing had happened. That night, I couldn't bring myself to tell my fiancé. I just kept replaying it in my mind, over and over. Even now, my hands shake thinking about it. Every night, from the woods just east of the cabin, we would hear the most chilling, gut-wrenching screams. They weren't animal sounds. They sounded human, but twisted and unnatural. Eventually, I gathered the courage to ask a guy who lived down the road if he'd ever heard them. He just shrugged and said, "Oh yeah, probably that woman who camps out down there. She's not all there." His casual answer unsettled me even more. Why would a woman be out there, screaming like that every night? And if it really was her, why hadn't anyone done anything? Despite everything, I tried to adjust to life in the cabin. I used to pan for gold as a hobby, and we had a creek just a short walk from our front door. It was one of the few things I genuinely enjoyed about living there. One afternoon, I was by the water, just off to the side of a small wooden bridge, sifting through the sand when an old truck pulled up. The driver, a man in his late 50s or early 60s, weathered and serious, rolled down his window and called out, "You carrying a gun?" I blinked, caught off guard. No, but I have bear spray." His expression remained unreadable. "It's not the bears or cougars you need to be worried about in these woods." Then he just drove off, leaving me standing there, watching his taillights vanish down the road, a cold unease settling in my stomach. Years later, a friend introduced me to a podcast about the paranormal, mostly stories of strange creatures and unexplained events. I almost couldn't believe what I was hearing. Dozens of people describing the exact same kind of orb I'd seen that night. I had always thought the idea of Sasquatch and similar legends was nothing but old folklore. But now, I'm not so sure. We sold the property a few years later, but I still wonder who or what is out there. That afternoon, I had just gotten back from the gym, grabbed a bite to eat, and was about to relax when my buddy called. He asked if I wanted to take a ride on my motorcycle, something we did often, just cruising, blasting music, and soaking in the atmosphere. The weather was perfect, hot, bright, and clear, so I grabbed my keys and helmet and headed out. At first, we just rode aimlessly, letting the music play as we enjoyed the heat. Eventually, my fuel gauge started dipping low, so we figured it was time to head back. That's when my friend suddenly pointed at an unmarked gravel path disappearing into the trees. It looked pretty ordinary, but we had nothing better to do. So we thought, Why not? The incline was much steeper than it first seemed. So steep that my buddy had to hop off while I pushed the bike up with the throttle. Once we reached even ground, I decided to ride ahead a little, just to see where the path led. It was mostly a twisting gravel road cutting through dense trees. Then, on the left, I spotted something strange. An opening in the woods with fresh tire tracks leading down another trail. Stood out, but I ignored it and kept going. And then I saw him. About 10 feet ahead, partly hidden by a curve in the road, a man stood next to a car. He hadn't noticed me yet, but I had a clear view of him. He looked to be in his early 30s, wearing a dark cap and a gray zip-up. Something about him felt off. My first instinct was that we had accidentally wandered onto private land, but there were no signs, no gates, nothing to indicate we shouldn't be there. Still, my gut told me to turn back. I rode back to my friend, who was still catching his breath from hiking up the steep trail with his heavy helmet. I told him about the guy, and as we debated whether to check out that side path with the tire tracks, something made our stomachs drop. Headlights. The car was coming fast. My friend practically leaped onto the back of the bike, and I gunned it down the hill. As we hit the main road, I glanced in my mirror. The car was still there, turned onto the road, following us. My pulse spiked. The guy was tailing us, keeping pace, closing the distance. I took a sharp turn onto a smaller side road, one I had used before, which connected to a bike path. When we looked back, the car had stopped. It just sat there, watching. Then, after what felt like forever, it slowly drove away. Alone in the silence, we laughed it off, trying to shake the uneasy feeling. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe we were overreacting. But then we checked the road on Google Earth. First, it looked normal. But then we noticed something strange. The satellite images showed several houses along the path, but one stood out. It looked well-maintained, with neatly trimmed grass and a camper parked outside. But in the most recent images, the place was a wreck, garbage everywhere, clothes scattered along the driveway, debris all over the yard. It looked abandoned, but also recently used. And then came the kicker. When I tried to follow the road further on Google Earth, the path just blurred out. The last stretch was completely erased, like someone had deliberately removed it. Couldn't let it go. We had to go back. We weren't planning to return so soon, but curiosity got the best of us. This time we took a car and brought another friend. And I wish we hadn't. Something was different. Paths that should have looked familiar seemed off. But the biggest shock? There was a cabin now. I was sure it hadn't been there before. We had looked at that exact spot last time. There had been nothing but trees. But this place looked old, weathered, like it had been standing there for decades, yet somehow still taken care of. Then we found a roadblock, a new one. Someone had put up a barrier, blocking off the last stretch of the path. We had no choice but to leave the car behind and walk the rest of the way. The closer we got, the worse the feeling in my gut became. I kept looking over my shoulder, the sense of being watched growing unbearable. And then we saw it, a nondescript building surrounded by a tall fence. Next to it, a camouflaged radar tower rose above the treetops. Then we saw the sign, an official warning from the government, explicitly stating that taking photos was prohibited. I wasn't about to push my luck. We turned around immediately and made our way back to the car. But before we left, we decided to check out the strange cabin. My friend walked up to the window while I stayed back, an awful feeling twisting in my stomach. He only peeked inside for a second before he froze. Then he bolted. I didn't ask questions, I just ran after him. We jumped in the car, and as I sped away, I finally got him to talk. The inside was staged, he said. Too perfect, too clean, like a fake setup. Then he told me the worst part. There had been a cup of coffee on the table, and it was still steaming. Someone had just been there, and they had been watching us. Since then, I've been analyzing the satellite images, and something is seriously wrong. That house, the one with the camper and the trimmed lawn, is gone. The other two houses are still there, but that one has been wiped from the map, like it never existed. But I know I saw it, and I know it wasn't abandoned. I don't know what's going on out there, but whatever it is, it's seriously messed up.